Immigrants are welcome here. Keep our children safe from fear. We need help, not speed or guns. We are your constituents. Representation. Representation. All right, let's do that one more time. Ready? Immigrants are welcome here.
Immigrants are welcome here.
Keep our children safe from fear.
Keep our children safe from fear.
We need help, not guns or speed.
We need help, not guns or speed.
Felder, give us what we need.
Felder, give us what we need.
Representation. Representation. Okay, thank you everyone. And with that, I will now turn it over to Naomi Rabia.
Just to be clear, everyone, this is not about, we're not endorsing anybody, it's about issues, especially what happened yesterday when speed cameras died. Thanks to good hard work, your senator here. I know it's supposed to be black. Anyway, my name is Naomi Rabia. I'm from New York City, Progress, and welcome and thank you to everyone for attending this rally about what we need and deserve representation in New York Senate District 17 and in New York State, particularly when the laws being passed or not being passed in Albany mean that our mental and physical health and well-being are at stake. Today we'll discuss the importance of some of these issues and why it is imperative that our state senator be willing to meet with us and discuss these issues in an honest way. These issues include universal, single-payer health care in the form of the New York Health Act, justice for child sexual abuse survivors in the form of the Child Victims Act, immigrant rights in the form of the Liberty Act and the DREAM Act, school safety in terms of school speed cameras and keeping guns away from school. Senator Felder will not have a dialogue on these issues. He's locked them in the Senate. He has promised to meet with his constituents, but more often than not, will not commit to times for meetings or listen to our perspectives. If we are fortunate enough to have meetings with the senator or staff, it has often been the case that they let us speak, but they don't listen. Senator Felder knows that the Jewish tradition, time and time again, values transparency. For example, in examining commentaries on the biblical text of Bamidbar, that's Numbers 27:16, the scholar Rashi said that in forming his conclusions and opinions, Moses' successor, which we know to be Joshua, listens and learns from others. He can be tolerant, which does not mean being passive or weak. Our tradition also demands that we avoid anything that can be perceived as unethical. One example is Shemot, Exodus chapter 38:2, when Moshe commanded a detailed account of all items to be in the building of the tabernacle in Mishkan. The records were compiled in a public and open manner. Our senator is transactional, but not open or transparent. Many of us are wondering why our senator will not explain in any meaningful way his legislative priorities and why he votes the way he does. Why does he avoid taking stands on important issues? When he does say how he'll vote, why does he not explain his reasoning behind it? There is only so long he can reasonably say he needs to see more data and research to form an opinion, as he has, for example, with speed cameras and the New York Health Act, especially when such research exists and many members of this community have provided it to him. It is not his duty to seek data out so that he can make an informed decision and relate his reasoning to the public. Why is it extremely hard to obtain a face-to-face meeting with him, let alone a public one? In our modern world, with its myriad forms of communication, our leaders have more ways to let us know what they are doing than Moses did. constituents, and he was elected to represent us, all of us. If he doesn't represent his constituents, if he doesn't meet with us, if he doesn't take positions on legislation that is important to us, then he is simply not doing his job. We're going to start by looking at some of these important issues. And first up will be Nina Sabghir and Hilda Chazanovitz to talk about speed cameras, which, as we know, ended yesterday.
Hello to all of you who have come to join us this evening. My name is Nina Sabghir, and I've been a resident of Pennsylvania for about 40 years. I've had the pleasure of raising 8 children here, and now I have the pleasure of being grandchildren. On March of 2014, I was seriously injured while bicycling to my job as a midwife at Brookdale Hospital. The speed limit had not yet been lowered to 25 miles an hour. A driver opened his car door in front of me, and I had a split second to try to avoid making contact. But the speed of traffic didn't give me time to move out enough to avoid the door. Some choice: get in the way of a fast-moving car and get hit, or hope I could miss the door. I wasn't that lucky. The experience brought me through 2 major surgeries, 2.5 years of rehab, and a new awareness of speeding and reckless driver behavior. I have been a nurse and a midwife for close to 30 years. When asking my patients about their health and about their families, I frequently learn that my patient uses a walker or cane due to some type of motor vehicle crash. Sometimes they were passengers in a car, but all too often they were pedestrians hit while crossing streets. And too often I hear that one of their children was hit by a motor vehicle and killed. This kind of traffic violence takes place far too frequently. In fact, injuries and death caused by reckless drivers is a public health crisis. We hear about individuals being hit and killed by speeding drivers almost every day. We rarely hear about the even larger number of people who have been injured. My son was hit by a car this winter when the driver made a left-hand turn. My son was crossing the street with the light and was in the crosswalk. He had some injuries, but fortunately, nothing life-altering. Unfortunately, many who are injured sustain major injuries. They will never be the same and are often permanently disabled. In addition to the pain, the medical costs place a tremendous burden on insurance and, in fact, on all of us. Think about it. When car insurance is put out in the form of no fault, all of our insurance rates go up. When no fault is exceeded, it goes on to private insurance. When that's exceeded, They don't want to see grieving parents whose child left for school healthy, but due to a speeding driver, will not be coming home. Senator Felder, you live and claim to represent a community with one of the largest numbers of children in New York. We also have many schools of all types, including public schools, yeshivas, charter schools, and colleges. And I'd like to point out that right down the street there is a high school, Yeshiva Flatbush High School, and Toro College. And the other way, there is Yeshiva of Flatbush Elementary School. One would think that you would feel a sense of responsibility to the families in your district. In the Talmud, we learn that to save a life is to save an entire world. Conversely, he who destroys a life has destroyed an entire world. Mr. Felder, as a graduate of Torah Vodaas, one of the most esteemed yeshivas in New York, surely you learned this. Furthermore, in Demuro, we learned that a person is responsible if an injury happens because of his negligence. You may remember learning the injunction that when building a house, one is supposed to install a guardrail around the roof to prevent someone from falling, lest you have blood on your hands from their injury or death. This is symbolic of taking responsibility to prevent any kind of injury or death to another person. Yet you willingly put our lives in jeopardy by refusing to vote in favor of maintaining and expanding the speed camera bill. Mr. Felder, the speed camera bill around our schools was shut off yesterday. How long before you have blood on your hands because of your willingness to make our lives a bargaining chip? You had an opportunity to show your community that our lives are of paramount importance. You had an opportunity to tell drivers that you expect nothing less than following the law and driving with care. You had an opportunity to show the many families in your district that protecting children is the #1 priority. And you had the opportunity to show your respect for the elderly and less able by ensuring that drivers will obey the speed limit and stop at crossing lights. I can only wonder what perversion or corruption has allowed you to act with utter disregard for the residents of your district and for all New Yorkers. Senator Felder, you still have an opportunity to make a change, to act as a leader. To those who claim that speed cameras are a money grab, the answer is don't speed. It won't cost you any money. You can make the Zuach Nefesh, saving a life, a priority, and tell your constituents that you care. Tell Senator Flanagan and Golden it's time to go back to Albany and vote yes for saving lives. Our health and our safety matters. Can you hear me? Hello? Yeah. My name is Hilda Chazanovitz, and I don't live in this area right now, but I have many wonderful memories of my childhood when my family did live in this area. I think you just heard that as of yesterday, there are probably only 20 speed safety cameras still functioning. And I want to tell you why that should matter to every single person here. A few years ago, I would have never imagined that I would be here speaking as a victim of traffic violence and as a survivor, and luckier than most. The absolute disgrace, the shanda that is very real right now because our elected officials have let us down for no reason other than political expediency, means that we need to call on Senator Flanagan, Senator Felder, and Governor Cuomo to stop pointing fingers at each other and take ownership and responsibility. On June 8, 2016, I crossed the street a block from my house and was struck by an SUV making a left-hand turn to hurriedly get on the highway. At that intersection, there's a public school, Public School 75, which was in session. The school was
had been a speed camera at that location, the driver would not have been speeding. I was luckier than most, as I said, although I was rushed to a trauma center, operated on within an hour, and spent almost a month in the hospital. And I'm still struggling. But I decided to channel what happened to me into becoming a kind of activist to fight for those things that could change what was a reality. And that reality is that crossing the street in New York City with the light in a crosswalk is dangerous. And there are some simple solutions. Speed cameras are one of those solutions, and unfortunately we live in a city that's dependent on our state legislature to enact the legislation needed and to continue to be programmed and expanded. For those of you who may not know much about speed cameras, they are really the only effective way to keep drivers from speeding at locations where there are school zones. Our policemen, as good as they are, can't possibly keep up with enforcing the speed limit at all of those locations. And the results for the test sites where speed cameras have been in operation are extraordinary. Speeding has been reduced by 63%. Deaths and injuries are down considerably. The bottom line is there is absolutely no reasonable explanation for leadership in Albany, including Senator Felder, not taking action at this point. Now that doesn't mean they still can't take action, because speeding kills. And as we approach September and kids go back to school, there's going to be issues. And I really hope that we don't have to wait for another child to not just get injured, but perhaps killed before our legislators will stand up and do something. Woo-hoo! So, for any of you who are interested, I would urge you to call Senator Felder's office, to call Senator Flanagan's office. I have some phone numbers. I'm happy to share that with you. But the truth is, speeding kills, or it seriously injures. And that's why I think I'm luckier than many. Most of the members of Families for Safe Streets, I'm afraid, have lost children in senseless circumstances. And speed cameras are a proven way of cutting back on speeding and making sure that drivers can be held accountable. There is no reason not to support this program. Thank you very much.
Next, it's my honor to present Lovy to talk about the Child Victims Act.
Hi, thanks everybody for coming out. My name is Lovy. I'm the Director of Community Organizing for ZA'AKAH, which is an organization that's dedicated to raising awareness about child sexual abuse in the Orthodox community and lobbying in Albany for legislative reforms like the Child Victims Act. And the reason I'm here today is because for too long, New York State law has protected child sexual abusers. It's protected people who rape and molest children. Currently under New York State law, if you sexually abuse a child, the child you abused only has until they're age 23 to report. Most victims don't disclose under the best of circumstances. Most sexual abuse claims are never reported. New York, right now, has laws concerning child sexual abuse reporting that are in line with Mississippi and Alabama. The three of those states, New York, Mississippi, and Alabama, have the worst laws in the entire country when it comes to allowing victims to report child sexual abuse. What this means is that hundreds, if not thousands, of predators remain hidden behind New York State law every year in New York because their victims aren't able to walk into police stations and report them. And having been an advocate for the past 6 years for survivors of child sexual abuse, I've been in the unpleasant situation to walk into a police station with a survivor of child sexual abuse, help them file a report, only to hear the police officer at the desk tell them, "I'm sorry, you're too old. We can't listen to your claim. We can't do anything against your abuser. Come back with somebody else who was abused more recently." Now, how messed up is it that you could go into a police station, report that you were raped, and have a cop tell you that you have to come back with somebody who was abused more recently? We have people who are willing to report that can't because New York State law prevents them from doing so. Now, there is a bill called the Child Victims Act that would extend the criminal statute of limitations going forward. It would extend the civil statute of limitations going forward, meaning that instead of being able to sue and prosecute only up until age 23, you'd be able to report and prosecute and sue for longer. Another provision in the bill would also open a 1-year retroactive window during which any claims that have already passed the statute of limitations, meaning any victims who are turned away by the police or the courts for being too old, can go back to court and sue their abusers. And not only will this allow them to get the money they need to pay for the treatment, to treat the symptoms and disorders caused by sexual abuse, it'll also help us, the public, identify these predators so we can keep our children away from them. Now, for 12 years, the Senate Republicans have been blocking this bill. For 12 years, they've been obstructing it to the point where it can't even reach the floor of the Senate for a vote. They can't even vote yes or no on whether or not to adopt this life-saving legislation. And in recent years, Simcha Felder has been instrumental in collaborating with the Republicans to block this bill that would help protect children from future sexual abuse and would help secure justice for survivors of sexual abuse. Survivors of sexual abuse who couldn't be saved before, maybe because their abuser couldn't be identified before. Now, there was a study that came out very recently, within the last 2 months, in this community, and this affects me. This affects me because I was sexually abused in Simcha Felder's district. I was sexually abused in Borough Park, actually a few blocks away from Simcha Felder's Borough Park district office, back with you as a city council member. I was sexually abused for years, and nobody did anything. They didn't do anything because in this community, you keep quiet about sexual abuse. You don't tell anybody. You hide in fear. You hide it, hoping that nobody ever finds out. Because who will ever accept you into a yeshiva if you were sexually abused? Who will ever marry you if you were sexually abused? Who's going to have what to do with your family if you're sexually abused? And that doesn't even cover the people. That doesn't even cover the people who want to report. That's just because you keep quiet about it. You pray that nobody finds out your secret. In this community, if you report sexual abuse, you are liable to lose everything. You could lose your job. You could lose your home. You could lose your family. You could lose your children, could be thrown out of schools. It is not safe in this community to report sexual abuse before the age of 23. It's not safe to do so. And knowing this full well, organizations like Agudas Yisrael, the Catholic Church, Boy Scouts of America, American Insurance Association, Zurich Insurance, and Liberty Mutual, to name a few, have been lobbying against this bill, because their constituent organizations are not interested in being held liable for the abuse they enable. And there are people who have sexually abused dozens of children who these organizations are interested in covering up for because they're donors or they're influential people in positions of power. This has to stop. That study I mentioned earlier that came out recently says that we have in our community, in the Orthodox community, that we have as much, if not more, sexual abuse going on here. We have as much, if not more. And why does that happen? Why is that allowed to happen? with Alabama and Mississippi. We have forces in our community that tell victims you have to shut up under penalty of losing everything. Well, you know what the Child Victims Act would do? When those kids grow up, when they're no longer 23, when they're married off, when their children are already in yeshivas, they'll be able to go back and say, you know that rabbi? You know that Rebbe who's been teaching for 30 years in that school? He sexually abused me, and he's probably sexually abusing children now. I want to sue him. I want to publicly identify him. I guarantee you, once this law passes, once the Child Victims Act passes, there will be hundreds of abusers exposed who have been hiding behind New York State law. And that's why it's imperative that we have the Child Victims Act for the safety of this community. If there was somebody, your neighbor, somebody in your shul, somebody teaching in your school, somebody babysitting your kids who was a sexual abuser, wouldn't you want to know about it? Wouldn't you want to protect your children? Simcha Felder is blocking the bill that would allow you to identify them. Simcha Felder is blocking a bill that would allow us to identify pedophiles who have stayed hidden behind New York State law, and Simcha Felder is preventing survivors of sexual abuse from getting the justice they deserve and the money they need to pay for their treatment, to treat the things that were done to them when they were sexually abused. Here, Simcha Felder, you may think you're representing your constituency when you block the Child Victims Act, but there are hundreds and thousands of sexual abuse victims in this community who are your constituents too.
Yes.
And they don't have a voice here. They're depending on us, and they're depending on you, and they're depending on the responsible adults, and they're depending on their legislators, and they're depending on their advocates to speak for them. Because they can't. They're scared, and with good reason. They don't have the ability to do so. They aren't safe. That's your job, really. It's to represent your constituents, to fight for their safety, to make sure that they never have to be abused, that they don't have to live a life in fear of abuse, that their parents don't have to live in fear of sending them to school, of giving them to babysitters, of letting them in the company of tutors, because they don't know who might be a sexual abuser. We need to be able to identify these people. We need to expose these hidden predators. We need to allow people going forward to get the justice they deserve. 23 is not enough. The average age of reporting is around 45. 45! That's double what New York allows right now. The fact that Simcha Felder is blocking this is disgusting. It shows that he cares more about the institutions that are imploring him not to allow this bill to go forward than he does about the children who are being abused in those institutions, and are being abused in homes, and being abused by family friends, and being abused by people who know full well, that they can abuse with impunity in New York State, because Simcha Felder will protect them. It's enough. It's enough. You need the Child Victims Act. Simcha, stop blocking it, or we'll vote for somebody else.
Shame on Simcha! Shame on Simcha! Shame on Simcha!
Shame on Simcha! Shame on Simcha! Shame on Simcha! Shame on Simcha! Shame on Simcha!
Sorry. Hector, Jairo, Martinez to talk about immigrants' rights.
Oh, Congress, wipe out! Who's responsible for blocking the Child Victims Act? You're part of the lobby.
Can you hear me?
Yes!
Can you hear me?
Yes!
Okay. My name is Hector Jairo Martinez. I am an undocumented immigrant. I live in Dimbus Park. This is my home. New York is my home state. Before I tell you my story, first I want to hear a loud applause for the courage of every single person that has come up here. For every person that's standing on the street listening to what we have to say. was out of their reach. For too long, people have allowed this institution that was built by them to be used against them. It's going back to the streets, holding our representatives accountable for what they were voted for in office.
Right.
Now, today we're here in front of Senator Simcha Felder. He represents District 17 as a Democrat. Okay, repeat after me. Simcha, you're a Democrat. Do you hear it? Simcha, you're supposed to be a Democrat. So, let me tell you this. Senator Felder has buckled time and time again when it comes to showing up for the community, for the diversity that is in this community. Yeah. So, as a Democrat, you're supposed to support the dignity and respect of all members of your community. Again, of all members of your community. New York is a proud state because it has received immigrants of so many backgrounds who have made this place their home. I am proud to say that this is my home. I have no problem going to Washington, getting arrested at Senator Schumer's office, calling him out on his bad and terrible decisions as Senator Majority Leader. So here I am today calling you out on your stuff. So, the New York State DREAM Act, what is that? It would give people who have lived in this state an opportunity to have the access to financial resources that most of our families contribute to get an education, keep making this state the wonderful and beautiful state that it is. Senator Felder, you forget this. You are one of two Democrats who oppose the passing of this vital legislation in the Senate floor. You sided with the Republicans. I'm sorry, you're supposed to be a Democrat.
Right.
I think you didn't hear that correctly. Diversity is what makes this place so strong. You may be of Jewish background, but don't forget that your community is also incredibly diverse.
Go get some work, get a job. Guys.
And we have all worked together to make this place safe for everybody. But there are things that you have done that don't stand by that. Another act that you have opposed that would grant the safety of people in your district and in our state is also the New York Liberty Act. What the Liberty Act does is that it prevents agencies from collecting or sharing an individual's immigration information with federal agencies. It prohibits state and local law enforcement from stopping, questioning, and arresting a person based on their perceived immigration status. How do you know somebody's illegal? How do you know? Oh, whoopsie daisy. How do you know a person's background? Listen, you may recognize me as Catholic because I wear a cross. Some people recognize others as Jewish because they wear a yarmulke. But for many of us, our faith and our background is something that is inside us. And it's not a statue for discrimination. This state is made for people and by the people. And when you give agencies the power to discriminate and freely select what they do with people, it sets up a really big problem. I hate to bring this up, but you know, the 1940s, something terrible happened in Europe to the Jewish community. Where they decided to single out somebody for their faith. And I believe these people have something to share with you. These people are from your Jewish tradition. Millions of them lost their lives because they were discriminated and systematically removed from their communities. This is what happens when you start to label people. This is what happens when you start to give agencies like immigration, customs enforcement, or ICE the opportunity to come in and rip up families.
Shame!
Shame! Shame! So, before I say anything more, because I can talk on it forever, I just want to say this is, together we fight for our communities. In Simcha, there's a lot of us out here today. Remember that we all have families. We all have communities that we're part of. It might be just one voice that you're listening to right now, but it's hundreds of people that are behind us. Stand up for your community. Vote for the issues you say you were going to support. And listen. Listen to the people that know more than you. Your power comes from us. And we're going to hold you accountable. So to close up, I just want to very quick chant that show me what democracy looks like. And then you say, this is what democracy looks like. So, you ready? Show me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
Show me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
Show me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
And lastly, whose streets?
Our streets.
Whose streets?
Our streets.
Whose district?
Our district.
Whose district?
Our district.
Thank you.
Oh yeah, I'd like to continue about immigrants' rights. I don't know how this works. I'm sorry.
We can help me out here.
Oh, excuse me.
I'm sorry. Which one? I don't know. The red button?
Hello. Thank you.
Thank you, Hector. That was very inspiring. My name is Paul. I'm here to kind of talk about immigrant rights, but I'm from Bay Ridge, a similarly conservative neighborhood where there is a small force of progressive people starting to fight back against the hate and cynicism that we see in our neighborhoods. And we're a group of like-minded organizers in Bay Ridge, and today I'm here to thank all of you, my fellow human beings, my siblings, for putting pressure on your elected officials. In this climate, we can only depend upon one another to be vigilant that the rights of all people to live a healthy and safe life are being protected, and that what is being done in our name is being done to help advance the liberation of all inhabitants of this planet. Every day, people are waking up to the injustices in the world and thinking about what they can do on a local level to help. This is very inspiring in that respect. Late one night in June, I received a phone call from one of my fellow organizers that a man, Pablo Villavicencio, had been detained by ICE while performing his job as a delivery man. The man came to our neighborhood after he was called to the Fort Hamilton Army Base to deliver food. When he arrived, he furnished his municipal ID, the ID NYC. At that point, the guard at the base took it upon himself to play investigator and asked Pablo to provide immigration papers. When he could not, the guards detained him and soon after called and turned this man over to ICE. The visual of these guards enjoying pizza, the food that this man bought them to feed them, while that man was being taken away, makes me, quite frankly, sick. The three of us decided to call an emergency rally in response at the front of the base to make demands that Villavicencio be freed immediately. The next day, we had over 150 protesters march from the base of 5th Avenue, and around 5 activists were arrested, blocking traffic. Out of this rally, we were able to sustain a campaign to free Pablo and to abolish ICE. With the help of other immigrant rights groups in the city. Pablo was finally freed after 52 days in detention and being away from his wife and 2 young daughters. Our coalition was only a very small part of that, but I would argue an important part. Yes, his wife was a citizen, his children were a citizen. He was in the process of getting an application for his green card. You know what? Our part as the neighborhood that was where this happened, this detainment happened, was to be there to demand that this does not happen in our neighborhood. And when you see injustices happening here in this neighborhood, you all have to stand up and make those same demands. And to think of the trauma that has befell his family, his wife, his young daughters, and to think that in some ways this case is one of the lucky ones. That should be enough for us to seriously question the direction we are going in this country. Another horrific example I want to mention, just to expand out a bit, was the death of a Honduran trans woman, Roxana Hernandez. Fleeing sexual violence and the threat of murder, she arrived in the United States only to be intercepted by custom border agents and was jailed in what are known as icebox cells. Holding cells known for their cold temperatures. Roxana was HIV positive. There was a disruption in her treatment, and when she came down with a cold while in detention, and then was finally allowed to go to the hospital where she died of pneumonia. No excuses in 2018. It's horrible. The call to abolish ICE has been the most heartening shift that has occurred due to the outrage against the mass detainment of children in Walmarts. Walmarts turned concentration camps. This shift in thinking amongst a large number of citizens will be significant in helping to create the kind of grassroots movements that can help unite pro-immigrant forces and start to unravel the attacks that have been leveled against immigration since the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 targeted specific ethnic communities. ICE is an institution whose foundation and framework for human rights abuses is grounded in policies and practices which have evolved over the course of several administrations, both from Democrats and Republicans. It was birthed out of the Department of Homeland Security and has racial, ethnic, and religious profiling built into its DNA. This type of profiling is being used as a way to fulfill Donald Trump's promise that all 11 million undocumented immigrants will be deported. They are the forces sanctuary cities like ours should be protecting immigrants from. It is a horrific and abusive institution that should be dismantled. Abolish ICE. Abolish ICE. Abolish ICE. Abolish ICE. On the way to this very achievable goal, we need to hold our elected officials accountable. We must demand that they uphold the protections and reforms put forward and won by the immigrant-led movements of the past 2 decades, and we must demand that they support the Liberty Act and the DREAM Act. We have to be bold and demand even more. We as workers, as the people who make things run on a day-to-day basis, have the power to shut things down when we see injustice around us. We've done it many times in the past, and we'll do it many times in the future. Vote out those you disagree with if you need to, but the work must not stop there. I want to end with a quote by the great historian Howard Zinn. What matters most is not who is sitting in the White House or sitting in a city council office or state senate office, thank you, but who is sitting in and who is marching outside the White House pushing for change. Thank you. I have some flyers to hand out. Part of that coalition, the Free Pablo Coalition, is having a meeting on August 2nd, and we're looking for as many people to plug into that work as possible. So I'll be around handing out those flyers. Thank you so much.
Yay!
Next we have Julio Peña to talk about why armed guards in schools is not a good idea.
Good evening. Buenas noches. My name is Julio Peña. I live in Sunset Park, which is in Senate District 17. Thank you. I also work in a public high school in the district. After Parkland, we recognize that schools need to be safe spaces. No one wants to hear about another school shooting. No one wants to hear, solutions of putting more guns in schools is not the answer. Militarizing schools is not the answer. More guns is not the answer. Kids need welcoming environments that are safe from danger. We need to work with NYSD and school safety. We need to have better training and education. We need to have more funding for guidance counselors, social workers, and educators. We need to have more support services and referrals for students so that we can identify and address issues and address them immediately. We need to have support so that students can have safe environments. More importantly, Senator Felder, you need to engage your constituents.
Yes!
You need to talk to us. Please talk to your stakeholders, education officials, teachers, principals, superintendents. Find out what they need to be safe and supportive schools. We have ideas. We want to engage in a positive dialogue. We have these opportunities to engage in conversations to make schools safe spaces. Where are you? Where are these conversations? Where are these dialogues, these forums, these town halls? Where? Where's Felder? Where's Felder? Where's Felder? Senator Felder, why won't you come to the table and have these conversations? We are desperate for solutions for our students. We want safe spaces. No one is disputing we want safe schools. I think everyone is in agreement that we want to make sure schools are safe. We need you to come to the table to have these conversations. Otherwise, we're talking to an empty office.
Yeah.
Where's Felder?
Where is Felder? Where is Felder? Where is Felder? Where is Felder? Where is Felder?
Thank you.
Teachers not guns. 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 Teachers not guns.
Next we have Julio Peña to talk about the New York Health Act. Somebody tell me how this works. Just talking to it. Talking to it? Can you hear me? All right, great. So I've never done
I think that a lot of people here can relate to that. Yeah. I want to agree that everyone here deserves a round of applause and a whoop, because it is hard to come out here after a year, after more than a year of doing this, and keep fighting. After Trump came to power, I learned everything I could about what to do because I was in such shock. Everywhere I went, one of the main places was get
people are a bunch of fuckers. You're all a bunch of fuckers.
Was Get Organized Brooklyn.
You're one no good. Drop dead.
The people united will never be defeated. The people united will never be defeated. The people. I learned how to do that. Where was I? I learned from talking and listening about what to do from people who knew, who had done this in the 60s, that working locally is one of the most important things you can do. At that time, I didn't even know I had a state senator. I had no idea how New York politics worked. I didn't know that I was in District 17. Give it up for District 17. I didn't know that there was a New York Health Act that had been passed 4 times in the Assembly. 4 times. But it kept getting stuck in the Senate because of Simcha Felder. Why? Why? Why not pass universal health care in this state? Why not be an example for the rest of the country? Why not be a firewall against what is happening to the ACA, the Affordable Health Care Act, or Obamacare if you don't know what it is, and everything else in the rest of this country? We can do it in New York State. But Simcha Felder has been standing in the way. He is the single vote. Now that the IDC supposedly has come back into the fold, we need to take care of them too. But Simcha Felder, we have called him. We have petitioned him. There was a group that even went to Albany. Thank you, Anna. Give it up for Anna. And everybody else who went. So they went there and they talked to Felder. Went through all the normal processes you're supposed to go through, and his, what do you call it, the person that you don't director. All right. So they talked to the right people, but then they caught Felder in the hall, and they said, "Hey, we've been trying to get a hold of you." I'm paraphrasing, but he said, "That sounds like a good idea. I'll meet with you, maybe at a local library. Maybe in this, maybe in my office, maybe in the local library. Great idea." Well, guess what? He has not answered any calls to come and meet with his constituents. Shame! 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 He talks about his constituents and how he represents them. He is very fond of saying, "I'm not a Democrat, I'm not a Republican, I'm not a conservative. I represent my constituents." Well, we are all his constituents. Right. Woo! representing, he is not even representing. Because the New York Health Act covers everybody. It covers everybody in our district. It covers everybody in the state. It is low cost. It is proven. It helps businesses. Any kind of data he would need to see is available and has been shown to him. Or at least we have tried to show him. Yet he still remains the single vote that is not, the single senator that has not endorsed this Democratic senator who has not endorsed this act. He is a fake Democrat. Fake Democrat. He votes for the GOP, with the GOP. He votes with the Republicans. He caucuses with them, whatever. I'm learning all this stuff just right along with everybody else. But what we need to do is keep on him and keep voting and make sure that we keep asking him why he is not helping every single New Yorker have low-cost health care, Medicaid for all, Medicaid for all, Medicare for all. Because that is what we could have in this state if he would vote for it. Thank you.
Fight, fight, fight! Healthcare is a human right!
Fight, fight, fight!
Healthcare is a human right! Fight, fight, fight! Healthcare is a human right! Fight, fight, fight! Healthcare is a human right!
Susan's going to make a quick announcement and then we'll finish up. Thank you.
Hi, I just wanted to make an announcement about an event being held next Tuesday at Union Square. It is going to be the send-off for the Grandmother's Caravan, a group of women supporting immigrant and asylum seekers' rights. They are going to be traveling down to the Mexican border to protest the separation of families and the Trump administration policies separating families. They are hoping to get as many people to send them off on their journey as possible. So if you could make it to Union Square next Tuesday at 11:30 in the morning, that would be great. Thank you.
Most of us here today are Senator Felder's constituents, and he was elected to represent us, all of us. If he doesn't represent his constituents, if he doesn't meet with us, if he doesn't take positions on legislation that is important to us, he's simply not doing his job.
Vote him out!
On the surface, the senator engages in reasonable activities promoting constituents' well-being, like health screenings and free legal clinics. Yet he refuses to take a stance and avoids questions about universal single-payer health care, which research shows would benefit a community such as this one that relies heavily on CHIP, Medicare, Medicaid, and ACA. He will not acknowledge that it's dangerous to assume that school safety looks the same in every school. Saying all schools should have armed police ignores the fact that due to historic and systemic prejudice and from a psychological perspective, an armed police presence can hinder some students' chance to succeed.
That's right.
Right. The New York City Department of Transportation's data showed that the use of traffic cameras cut speeding by 63% and crashes by 15% in school zones that use them. Yet Felder throws barriers up time and time again to preserving this life-saving program, which we know ended yesterday, unfortunately. As it stands, it is expected that a child who has experienced the trauma of sexual abuse should be able to confront their abuser within 90 days for a criminal act or age 23 for a civil suit. And this is immoral and illogical. Yet Felder will not take a public stance on the Child Victims Act, but he has said to some of us here that he will not vote for it. Our district has some 59,400 people who are not U.S. citizens. That's nearly 20% of our district's population. Felder's chief of staff told me personally, I believe it was September 7th, if I can look it up, 2017. Felder's staff told me personally that he is a state senator and therefore implying there is nothing he can do for immigrants. This shows the lack of ability or interest to look at the big picture on this issue. He addresses national issues insofar as it suits him. No matter who is in power, we the people have a right to be listened to. We have a right to have leaders who engage with all constituents. Keep calling, emailing, writing letters, approaching Senator Felder on the street to demand representation. I am asking you on the behalf of all of us to not give up and not let any politician take away our right to be represented. Thank you. Oh, and this is for Ben. Pikuach nefesh means to save a life in Hebrew. Ben, this is for you. So we have to make pikuach nefesh, pikuach nefesh, pikuach nefesh, pikuach nefesh. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone.
This is what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like. This is what democracy looks like.
Does Felder know what democracy looks like? No.
This is what democracy looks like.